During the Cold War, the KGB became the world's largest intelligence service, with around 480,000 employees. It was powerful, feared and respected, operating worldwide. But what happens when you find yourself in its crosshairs? Well, let's find out.
Has been shot dead. Litvinenko was poisoned.
The latest in a string of killings, pointing the finger of blame at the Kremlin.
It's an alleged political assassination.
Is to be classified as an act of state terrorism,
which judges believe was ordered by Russian state security.
His opponents have died in bizarre and grisly circumstances. They've been shot and blown up, hit by cars, pushed out of windows, died in apparent suicides. There are a whole trail of dead bodies leading back to the Kremlin.
Since the days of the Cold War, the Russian intelligence service has been famed for its brazen attacks on political dissidents in foreign lands. Their menu of insidious tactics is huge, from polonium in tea to underwear doused with the lethal nerve agent Novichok, to more straightforward assassinations by bullet. But one thing has remained consistent. Those who go against the Russian state and the reign of Vladimir Putin can and often do meet a grim demise. In this video, I'm going to cover 5 assassinations carried out in 4 different countries by Russia. Before we go any further, I know I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of most of these names, but bear with me, I'm not Russian, it is what it is. Without any further ado, however, let's get started with our first story, Alexander Litvinenko. First, let's travel to the affluent area of Mayfair in London. Its picturesque leafy streets were interrupted in 2006 when Mr. Litvinenko suddenly fell ill. Before we go any further, let's rewind the clock a little bit. Mr. Litvinenko was born in the Russian city of Grozny in 1962. Not much is known about his childhood, but in 1980 he was drafted into the Ministry of Internal Affairs. In 1986 he was recruited by the KGB Counterintelligence Section. Then in the 1990s he worked for the Central Staff of the Federal Counterintelligence Service and specialised in counter-terrorist activities and the infiltration of organised crime. Litvinenko met Boris Berezovsky in 1994 when he took part in investigations into an assassination attempt on the oligarch. He was later responsible for his security. Gradually, in this role, his feelings towards the Russian state and system started to change. This is due to a number of reasons, but a big one was during his time in the FSB, he discovered deep connections between the top leadership of Russian law enforcement and Russian mafia groups like the Soentsevo gang. He gradually realised the entire system was corrupt from the top to the bottom. He explained,
"If your partner cheated on you, or a creditor didn't pay, or a supplier didn't deliver, where did you turn to complain? When force became a commodity, there was always a demand for it. Enforcement gangs appeared. First it was provided by the mob, then the police, and soon even our guys realised what's what. And then the rivalry began between gangsters, cops, and the agency for market share. As the police and the FSB became more competitive, they squeezed the gangs out of the market. However, in many cases, competition gave way to cooperation and the services became the gangsters themselves."
This corruption troubled him, and with the help of Boris Berezovsky, he arranged a meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow to discuss it. Unsurprisingly, this fell on deaf ears as Putin was more concerned with saving face than dealing with the issue at hand, which by all accounts he still hasn't dealt with now. A lot happened in the next 6 years, but Litvinenko was personally dismissed by Putin after he held a press conference with the Russian news agency Interfax, in which he said he was ordered to kill Boris Berezovsky and Mikhail Tepreshkin. In October 2000, Litvinenko took his family and fled fearing persecution, stopping in Turkey before making his way to the United Kingdom. He was eventually granted political asylum on the 14th of May 2001. He then, with Boris Berezovsky, became a vocal critic of Vladimir Putin's regime and cooperated with British intelligence, mainly on combating Russian organised crime syndicates in Europe. Okay, now we're all caught up with this story, let's move forward to the 1st of November 2006. It was a warm autumn morning in London. As the sun rose in the city and through the wind-swept streets, Litvinenko said goodbye to his wife and family and emerged from the family home in Whitehaven. He had an important meeting today, with two former KGB officers, Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun, at the Pine Bar of the Millennium Hotel in Mayfair. But little did he know, these men he worked with, that he considered friends as comrades, had completely different intentions for their meeting. 2 weeks earlier, they'd arrived in London, carrying a substance 100 billion times more potent than cyanide, polonium-210. They sat down in the Pine Bar and talked over tea. It was on the face of it mundane, ordinary and run-of-the-mill, but without knowing, Litvinenko was sat feet away from an invisible nuclear murder weapon. We don't know for sure the means that they administered it, but forensic evidence suggests that Lugovoy and Kovtun slipped it into his tea during the meeting. What followed next was an experience akin to hell on earth. He spent the remainder of his life in agonising pain, suffering for weeks until he passed away. On his deathbed, he attested that Vladimir Putin had ordered his killing, which sparked a worldwide media frenzy, bringing attention to the brazen actions that the Russian state takes place on foreign soil. As a final note, this sounds like it was the slick work of two professional assassins, but by all accounts, Lugovoy and Kovtun are two of the most incompetent bungling idiots that the FSB could have possibly hired for the job. My next video will be on these two, but seriously look into them. It's incredible that they were trusted to even handle polonium-210. Six years later, London was rocked by another scandal, one that remained obtuse for much longer, mainly because it wasn't carried out by two people with a combined IQ of 80. Alexander Perepilichnyy, this guy was a Russian businessman of immense means who fled Russia in 2010. It's believed that during his time in Russia, he was involved in offering semi-legal financial services for fellow businessmen. During the financial crisis, he lost an astronomical amount of money and made the journey to the UK, where he tried to live a quiet life with his family in a secure compound in Surrey. At some point, he passed a series of documents to a firm called Hermitage Capital that implicated several Russian officials in the embezzlement of $230 million from the state budget. It's this action and his potential knowledge and involvement in historic dealings of a similar nature that made him a marked man. On the 10th of November 2010, he travelled back to the UK from a 3-day trip to Paris with his Ukrainian fashion designer girlfriend. When he arrived home, he was unwell after eating at an exclusive Japanese restaurant the night before. He rested for a night, but recently had been on a journey to improve his health after struggling with obesity and other health issues throughout his adult life. At around 5 PM on the same day, he decided to go out for a run on the leafy closed community he and his wife resided in, and collapsed. Neighbours found him lying in the street and attempted CPR, but he was pronounced dead 46 minutes after the ambulance arrived. In the wake of his death, Surrey police were adamant that there was no foul play and he died of natural causes. This was the story, and it stuck for 2 years through multiple investigations and inquests. However, one of his life insurance companies, Legal & General, ordered tests that detected a toxin from a Chinese flowering plant, Helselium, in his stomach. Nicknamed heartbreak glass, it triggers cardiac arrest if ingested. Technically speaking, his death is still unexplained, but the evidence points towards it being suspicious, especially considering it was reported posthumously that he might have been talking to British security services prior to his passing. While this is unconfirmed, it's also reported that in 2017 US intelligence officials passed MI6 intelligence saying that he was likely assassinated on direct orders from Putin or people close to him. Umar Israilov was born in 1981 in a village called Meksayurt in Chechnya. At the start of the Second Chechen War, he joined a local rebel group. He was captured and then detained in Chechnya's Camp Centeroy, in the home village of current Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov. During his detention, he was repeatedly tortured by Kadyrov himself. He was then forced to serve as one of Kadyrov's bodyguards and was tasked with returning to his village with the mission of delivering those who'd served with the rebels to security forces. This was an extremely dangerous time in Chechnya, with the Second Chechen War in full effect. While the involvement of Russian forces ended in 2002, separatist rebels were still routinely attacking Kadyrov's forces and those associated with them. Israilov and his father decided that this was far too dangerous and made arrangements for Israilov to leave the country. He and his wife escaped to Poland in autumn 2004 with fake passports and eventually settled in Vienna. During his time in Vienna, he became a vocal critic of Ramzan Kadyrov, even filing a complaint to the European Court of Human Rights in 2006 that he'd been tortured during his detention. Despite being thousands of miles away from his homeland, he never felt safe and was contacted by Chechen security forces encouraging him to return to Russia. According to Austrian police, in the days prior to his death, he complained he was being followed. On Tuesday the 13th of January 2009, two men ambushed him outside a supermarket at 1 PM. They tried to escape. He tried to escape, zigzagging across a crowded street, but stumbled as his pursuers fired 4 times. They caught up and shot him twice in the head. 3 Chechen men were later convicted for his murder. Otto Kaltenbrunner, Sulim Yamadayev, and Turpal Ali Yeshakayev were sentenced to life, 19 years and 16 years in prison respectively. It's really difficult to overstate how courageous Israilov was. To defy Kadyrov and flee is one thing. To actively pursue him in court and hold him accountable for his grotesque crimes and torture is another altogether. He knew that Kadyrov was closely associated with the Kremlin and how far their reach was, but he still chose to stand up and do what he thought was right. Ultimately, this bravery likely caused his death, but it highlighted the extent to which human rights have been abused in Chechnya and the brutality of its leader. Zelimkhan Khangoshvili was born in 1979 in an area of Georgia called the Pansiki Gorge, which is home to a large ethnic Chechen population known locally as the Kists. He attended school locally and later travelled to Chechnya in the late 90s for work. At the time it was known as the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, essentially a breakaway republic of Russia following the conclusion of the First Chechen War in 1996. In 2001, following the outbreak of the Second Chechen War, he joined the armed resistance of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria in their fight against Russia. During this time, Vladimir Putin named him specifically as one of the perpetrators of the Moscow subway bombing, which he vehemently denied, stating,
"The Russians are blaming me for many things, including terrorist attacks. This is a lie.
No one can provide any evidence that a single civilian was injured or killed in any of my actions." Following the conclusion of the Second Chechen War, he returned to Georgia, eventually fleeing to Germany in 2016 following multiple attempts on his life, which his brother attributed to Russian intelligence. On August 23, 2019, at around midday, Zelimkhan was walking in the Kleiner Tiergarten Park in Berlin, on his way home from his local mosque when he was ambushed in the street in broad daylight by a man riding a bicycle with a suppressed Glock 26. Witnesses told police the shooter rode up, shot Zelimkhan twice at close range and pedalled away calmly. The killer was later caught when he was seen dumping a wig, a handgun and his bicycle into the Spree River, and it was discovered that he travelled under a Russian passport with the name Vadim Sokolov. The passport itself was strange, however, as it had been issued without any biometric data. This seems minor, but this has been standard in Russian passports since 2009. This isn't anything new. The incredible organisation Bellingcat identified a pattern where GRU operatives travel under these old passports in an attempt to hide their real identities. Bellingcat also later identified the killer's real identity as Vadim Krasikov, born in August 1965 in the then Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic, and even found a previous murder he committed on a Russian businessman in Moscow in eerily similar circumstances. This is a clear and brazen assassination carried out by the Russian state in Europe, in which they issued a fake passport to a trained killer. Sulim Yamadayev is a fascinating character who fought on the side of Chechen rebels in the First Chechen War and later defected to Russia in the Second Chechen War, where he commanded Special Battalion Vostok under the Spetsnaz GRU. Spetsnaz GRU being the same team who more recently helped to seize Crimea as part of the Little Green Men. They really were the elite units and formed a pro-Kremlin militia beyond those controlled by Ramzan Kadyrov. In fact, during this time, he received the prestigious award of Hero of Russia. It's hard to imagine after this honour that he would have even the faintest idea how his life and time in Russia would end. But with this power and prestige caused friction between himself and the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, with this culminating in a battle between the factions in Gudamez in 2008 that resulted in 18 dead. On the 24th of September 2008, Yamadayev's brother Ruslan was shot dead in central Moscow while driving from the Kremlin. Following this, Yamadayev fled Russia for Dubai, fearing he would be next. Unsurprisingly, this fear was completely justified, and on the 29th of March 2009, he was shot in the back of his neck twice in an underground parking garage in the Gulf state. He died at the scene, with the Dubai police force later accusing Duma member Adim Demlikhanov of ordering the assassination. These 5 really are just scratching the surface of the operations and killings carried out by the FSB and GRU in foreign lands.